Party people. The roof is on fire. We don't need no water. Let that burn. Yeah, that's right. This is Namo Kofi Joe. I'm on doing my thing for my monthly uh, roof is on fire volume. I don't know, but I'm back at it, trying to get it in for the end of the month, so I'm not rushing. But yeah, so you can catch me at all my social media handles is Awakening Kinship. You can catch me on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, X, whatever you want. Do your thing. You can always find a brother there doing his thing. Had a pretty eventful week. A lot of things happening around the world. We're going to talk about that painting in the background. Talk about the direction that I'm trying to take with my work, and just get a good feel for maybe a little bit of a political education that is going on today and around the world. But yeah, let me just get right to it and talk about that genocide in Gaza. That genocide, the genocide perpetuated by the Israeli people. Okay, even though their leader is their chosen leader, the people are allowing this leader to, and the government and the military, to commit, horrendous crimes to humanity. And we're not going to forget that in May 2026, on the 16th day. That is the most important issue and cannot be changed. The devastation of life and limb is not more than what's going on in other parts of the world. That's not what's making it so significant, because the same atrocities are being committed there are being committed, in a lot of global South countries that don't have the kind of resources that are available to people like me and people like the people that live here in the Western civilizations. I was looking at something earlier this week, and it kind of struck me because I even though I pretty much understood what it was saying, I never looked at it from that point of view. But it said something on a point of in 1884, there were no countries in Africa. And I was thinking about how that made sense to me, but it also is something that should be tied with something else. And that was more of the Africans in the diaspora who claim, citizenship in, different parts of the world, and don't understand that even their, renaming of themselves was part of the same thing that happened in 1884 when, Africa was being carved up by European powers, colonists, imperialists, who were going to decide what and when you can cross, borders based on, their own economic interests, political interests. And, it might not seem very significant, but I also think the same about Africans around the world who, because of their trauma, because of the conditions that they were put in, did not decide that they were going to be on these, these shores as who they are now being claiming to be, because of, the somewhat rights of having citizenship there, especially when I think about the Africans in this country who are, for the last 100 years, in probably 150 years, have believed that they are somehow or another still fighting for their own uh, citizenship. And that may seem like we're supposed to do that. Like this is what's wrong. What do you mean? That's no, that's not what it's supposed to mean. At least to me and others, is that when you become a citizen of a country, that means you got all the rights in the world as anybody else, and there's nothing, there's nothing standing in your way of whatever that is to achieve whatever you want to achieve. That's what I would think. And there's not been a day that we haven't been reminded in this country that we can't remember who we are. And I think, in a lot of ways, we do it to ourselves. I think, using that N word is like a way of not using a more direct or even more, pointed word as being African. An African can hold that same, hatred that you might have for your people as the N word. But in some ways, using that word African, which is really sitting at the core of the problem, the core of the issue, it's somewhat, we don't choose to use that. And I, I've been doing a little thinking about that. I've been wondering about the fact that once slavery ended, there was no redress. There was no let's go, or even if there was, it didn't last long. That there was no idea of what had happened to these people for 300 or 400 years should receive some kind of compensation, and they didn't. They almost gave the people that were enslaving them more credit than they did the people that did the work, and what within itself is speaking to the problem. We were having these ideas of like Juneteenth. We were going to be freed on Juneteenth, and Juneteenth to me now really only represents the fact that those slave owners changed the name of their business, okay, and they became more incorporated with the system that was going on already in the North, and they just found a way of fitting in, and but their main objective was the same. They didn't have any, difference of opinion about whether they looked at us as a people. And to think that in some ways or another, after, Juneteenth and maybe 50, 70 years later, we wanted to go back to Africa, and that was even being blocked because of what was going on in 1884. Okay. And many of us understood even after that brutal, treatment, rape, murder, in slavery, that we needed to go back to Africa. And I guess I shouldn't say go back to Africa, but I should say go beyond Africa, because what started in Africa with the claim of that's what it was the start of the deterioration of who we are as a people, and that to reclaim who we are as a people, we have to revisit what happened in Africa, in 1884. Why, when, and how that still is, affecting who we are today. That to me is a critical point that we need to think about as a people. And even when we look at the problems that are facing the world today, like the different war factions that are going on in Africa, there a lot of them are because of these borders that were created by these Europeans, separating families in two, kinship in two, Not to say that Africa didn't have its problems, not to say Africa was, this, pristine place operating, because if it was, it would have been able to fight off anything that came to harm it, right? But the time that Africans were living in the understanding of who they are as, as a people was interrupted. We can't sit here today and know exactly what would go on if we had 200 or 300 more years of never having being in contact with Europeans. You could say the same for the indigenous people of the so-called Americas. And without us really looking at that and addressing that issue, not acting like we're just going to forget about that. We're going, that's over with. We don't need to talk about that no more. Is denial. And it's coming back to a point where, because we didn't deal with it, that the youth, the young people, you can't tell them the same lies no more. You can't convince them. Once they understand, they get politically educated, you can't convince them that somehow or another this system is working for their benefit. Okay, you can't convince them of that. It didn't start that way, and it never has. And I'm not here to speak on the issue for Europeans, but it didn't really work for them neither. But that's in a lot of ways, sometimes we don't take into consideration. I was thinking a lot about how, while we were enslaved in this country and in the Americas, they were all colonized by European powers. So European powers would enslave these Africans, raise this capital from their, not paying them much, and developing a surplus based on what they have to pay everybody else and themselves. And then they had enough money even after that to reinvest into different areas. Where do you think they reinvested into? Europe. Okay, they never let go of that. They never let go of the idea that they were from Europe or some European country. And they try to laugh at you. They try to make fun of you that you don't have that kind of culture. You don't have that kind of understanding of life. But they also don't take into consideration how much you had to murder, rape, and kill people to believe that. Okay, you've stolen and robbed so many people of their, born natural ability to survive, their being. And you went around here talking about how this society is superior to any other society in the world. And it's crumbling, with your bare hands. Like, it's like you are not preventing the fall of this empire. You can confuse people about the problem. You can make it really unclear about the problem, but the problem remains. Once all the smoke and mirrors, disappear, you realize that this system has been perpetuating, some real nonsense, and it's affected a whole lot of folk, even to the point that they would die for this country. They would protect this country, and this is the same country that, stole your land, enslaved your people, make you think that what they're doing is better than everybody else. And you bought that. You took that. You sucked. You sucked that up. You breathed it in. And we just can't do that no more. We can, but we were definitely facing. Even the world is telling you. Even the nature with the hurricanes. The polar ice cap. We got the pollution. That we don't even realize the destruction that we're doing over these last 500 years that has accelerated and will continue to accelerate unless we, change the way, these, employer, we have a employer owned system by the people. Okay. An employer owned system by the people. Okay. Employer owned by the people. Okay. EOP. We need, then you would have health care. Then you would have food on the table. Then everybody would be at a home, okay, a house or something, and it may sound a little far-fetched, but the idea is, solid as a rock. We have so much to look forward to beyond the way the system operates, that if we could convince each other of that fact alone, we would not, we would put up with we would have the political astuteness, or to be able to describe the situation to the people, convince them that this is the problem, and that they would, choose to not live in a system that is designed like that, and that's just not up for debate right now. It just hasn't been made clear. And we have these, we have these horror stories that go on, as this country, props up, a little baby, country that's just like it. Israel is a agent for the United States. It protects or not protects, but it monitors, it surveils, the Arab, oil states. It's like the police of the Middle East, but they are treacherous people. And I know that there are some people in Israel that don't think like that. I understand that. And that's the same you could say for any group of people. The folks that are in charge, you are directly responsible for them. You can't run around away from that. You put these people in office. You believe you have some right to the land. You make sure that it's policed. And you'll protect it at any cost. Meaning, you will kill off, a whole, generation of people, to prove your point. And that is something that this country supports, something that this country finances, something that this country produces, extraordinary amounts of killing machines or war machines to achieve their goal. And it's almost like the truth should be able to stand alone. Like you shouldn't have to be able to use force or coercion to make a person do what you want them to do just because you think it's true. The truth should be able to stand on its own, 2 feet, that this person is going to get this. And if they don't, there's a reason why they don't get this. And until they understand that reason why completely, and flesh it out, then whatever truth you think you might be able to have for these people or that region or for that purpose, it can't be true. It just can't be true. And it's proven when people tend to bully their way around the world, push and shove, people, years go by and plenty of atrocities and murder and mayhem, continues. But when people look back on what had happened, they look and they see, the amount of destruction and, death. And then it comes to this question of international law. And man, I just got finished reading something about international law. For one, international law didn't even get started till around the 1940s, 1950, 45, 46. But then again, it never addressed the crimes committed before international law was even put in place. And then once even it was put in place, the countries that were committing the most acts of violence and treachery before then, took a position that, well, we're going to have a different position than everybody else because, we can't be high held for the crimes that were committed before. Their reasoning was that, well, we forced these people into that. We coerced them into that. Now they're into that. So as a result of them being into that, we can't deal with that any further. We need to move beyond that. And so in moving beyond, it means we're not even going to go back and redress what we had done. And that is what a lot of folk would consider logical. But whose logic? I mean, are we going to continue? We have these laws that they're talking about, international laws that tend to still work for the benefit of the people committing the most crimes. So how does that even make sense? To be honest, that you got a group of people who decide they're not even going to be involved in international law, so that we're not going to be held accountable for the things that we've done, against crimes against humanity. And then we're supposed to still go along with international law. Like when you do something that you do, well, then, we can come down on you. We can take it out, right? But those countries that choose not to be a part of that, have a different level of, confusion that they can carry, and it's all right for them to carry. That keeps with your idea of liberation in check. So we got this political education that we need. We need to understand economic situations that we're in. We have to understand socialism from a point of view of African socialism. African scientific socialism. And that in itself will help us to better understand and grasp what is ahead, what we need to do in moving it forward, and not, continuously, putting ourselves, in these traps. So it's been a busy week. There's been a whole lot of stuff going on. I've been working on this piece behind me, and we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about that because it's really related to what I'm talking about now. You can pretty much see it right now. I don't know if I need to turn it anymore, but I am going a little bit. Okay, that's better. All right, so we're going to talk about the process of putting this piece together. Can y'all see that? Okay, so that's the entire painting. This painting is called Whips or Wage. No, Whips, now Wages. Okay, and what it's depicting is there was a very famous slave, I guess, photographed in 1830s or something like that. And his name was Gord or Peter. And it didn't really matter what his name was. What mattered most was that this picture was showing his back. And his back was full of all of these, just whelps, large whelps from getting, whipped, and, when your body gets whipped, it leaves a mark. And these marks were covered his back, to the point where they even melted together. And it was used as one of these pictures to, show the horrors of, slavery, right? And so what I did was I took that picture, drew it, and then applied the idea that the whip is now the wage. And I've tried, and I haven't finished with the painting, but it's going to show that these whelps that were on his back were also today showing, the currency, the fact that every time a person got whipped, that was money that these folk was, investing in. They were trying to get this slave to do the most work for the less cost under the most brutality. Okay. And so that's the way his body is going to look. It's going to look like it's been whipped and it's been waged. Okay. Because we live in a country today where people can't even afford, health care. They can't afford to live in neighborhoods where there's no pollution. They can't afford to live in neighborhoods where they have grocery stores, or, decent housing, and you expect people to think that there's been a change, there's been something different. So in the background, you notice there's a kind of a, skyscraper kind of structure, one on one side, and then on the other side, there's a little more kind of colonial, kind of old kind of construction on the other side. And then on the where the chair is sitting, it's a street, and on the street there's supposed to be like a market on both sides, and there's people, gathering, take care of business, and that was kind of what I did was I drew the picture of Gordon, and it was just the chair and the man, and I put it into an AI kind of format, and it gave me the background, but I had to also prompt it with why I had this picture, and then what I wanted on the picture, which was the to show the wage. So the background kind of materialized off of the words that I used, what I chose. And I think I can show you, see that? So this is kind of like what the computer pushed out, which really wasn't, exactly, but you can also see the prompt, that I used, some of the wording that I used to, address this issue. And I do have the actual original drawing. Yeah, so this was the original drawing, and then when I got the computer, I kind of did like a rough background of how I wanted the background to look, and you see the line on the paper. So once I this the one that separates this into 4 quadrants, that's was used to take this picture and to draw it onto the canvas, and I might have shown you that before. So I just want you to see some of the process that it takes, to put some of these things together. One thing I liked about what the AI did, which is something that I don't tend to do when I do my paintings, but I tried to incorporate that idea into what I did this time, was it tended to help with the light. I kind of drew the buildings based off of the light on one side, and then the buildings based off the shadow light on the other. So it gives this kind of, I don't know if you see it that way, but I see it in a way where it gives this this person in this chair, a feeling of really being there, really being in that environment, and not like the original picture, which was just a black and white picture with a man, and it is some type of room that they, you couldn't tell anything other than that beating, and in a white background. And I was wrestling with that when I was thinking about this. Did I want to do this in black and white, and copy this photograph in the same? And I kind of fell away from that early because I felt like the picture I was trying to draw had to have some other meaning, And so that's why, I came up with the wage. The whip was the way the painting looked to me, a man that had been whipped. And but I also felt like those same whips have turned into wages now, and we're just being whipped with wages, right? And at the time, the people that were getting whipped for wages too. They were making sure other people had a whole lot more than they did. So I don't want to ever forget. I did this painting to memorialize that it was more than just the picture of a man being whipped, but it was a picture of a people who have lost their wages, right? Who have been whipped, right? And so this I have to tighten up a lot of it right now. I don't have it where I feel like I'm finished, but I think at least at this point I mapped out everything. Like I don't need to draw more into it. I just need to refine the pieces that I already have in it. To bring it out more. Like the ground will be a lot more visible by the way the sun hits it, or the shadows of the buildings bouncing off of the road. There might be a little more detail around the window sills to make them look a little sharper. The people in the background will have some more little, defined features and that type of thing. The back, it will probably be the center of attention in this piece. And so I want those economic whelps to look as just as important if it was just whip mark whelps without the economic indicators. So this but this painting should be finished. It should be done. It's pretty close, and I want to be able to move on. But I like this. This is a little bit of a departure. I think the one thing that I've been doing with this AI has been having it accelerate, my actions in my paintings. I'm getting the picture a little more of a realistic kind of tone. And so this one kind of, I think, in a lot of ways is one of the, the first attempts at that, even though a few other ones I've attempted. I think they lit more back to my own style. But not to say this is not, but this is a little more of a enhanced style, like the idea that I'm able to, work with the material to bring about, it's definitely social justice, but also a sense of, something that's beyond, our own kind of sometimes comprehension of things, and take us, because I really don't like the word Afrofuturism. I just feel like we're being captured, and it's hard to really debate that with people, explain that part, because we do live in a world of representation, and representation matters, to a lot of people, and representing yourself, as a policy leader or, individual success, in this country is it's big time, like you could be, you could be pop locking, with that kind of, success. And so I think that is kind of like, what we have to be a little leery of, a little weary of, but yeah, this painting I think is going to be nice. It's going to be it's going to be a little departure from what I'm doing, but I think you'll probably see that as the things I do now from now on will have a little reflection of this. And I don't even know if you could really tell if it might just be something that I see, something that I know about my work that I can, I mean, because sometimes, I think it's hard for people to really understand what I'm doing, and that's okay, because it's meant for me to, be clear, explain myself, right? And I have a tendency, this is just me as an artist, I have a tendency to, when I see it, then it's done. I you know, I don't have an artistic eye for what might help me see it the way other people see it, if that makes any kind of sense. But I do think there are people that are good at that, and but I also kind of feel that I'm not trying to sell you something. I'm not trying to give you a, advertisement for something. I'm trying to just breathe, be me, do my thing without any kind of restraints on, you know, the direction that I take. I want to be able to have a um, clear direction, but have that direction guided by, ancestral, references rather than, the kind of creolization. And matter of fact, the next painting that I'm gonna be working on is going to be called Africanization or Creolization. And that I'm still playing around with the name, but it will have those two words in it. And I've been doing some real research on the idea that everything that we've touched as a people, as African people, once we touched it, once we've experienced it, once we were influenced by it, whatever, we Africanized it. You know, whether we understand that or not, we have to have done that. There's so many things that when a culture of people come in contact with another culture of people, um, that they're not going to lose anything unless that person is using force and coercion or murder or rape to eliminate that. But if they were just as two cultures of people that were able to share, they would realize that once they shared who they were as a people, they became more Africanized. From my point of view, and the other part of that is the creolization. So the African is going to Africanize whatever it touches, and then the person who doesn't consider themselves, African, you know, will use a form of creolization, meaning that they'll create things around people to have them think of something else other than themselves, if that makes sense. So there's only really two processes, I believe, that are going on. One is the idea that everything that Africans touch, and I have to kind of go back on that even a little bit, because the only reason I'm using African is because Africa was the imposed name of the Europeans who decided that that's what we're going to call it, which has nothing really to do with what it is. And we'll get into that a whole lot later. But the same is somewhat true for creolization, because they went around trying to decide on what was right for everybody. Okay. And in doing that, they skipped over some of the things that these people were doing that were, culturally acceptable, culturally, in line with their view of the world. And as a result of that, you had a lot of those people start acting like their oppressor and their exploiter. And so that's what I consider creolization. So that we have to be clear is that, people don't just do things, from nowhere. They had some source, and you know, you go into certain people's houses and you sit down to eat, and there ain't nothing that they gonna put out on the table that you're gonna want to eat. It's gonna be just that foreign to you. And for a lot of us who sit there and eat that shit, and start to liking it, we might want to put a little hot sauce on it or something. We might want to put a little pepper, something. But the idea is that we probably have become more, creolized than Africanized, because we came in with the African. We could have sat there and said, "Nah, I can't fool with that. Got to give me this, got to give me that." But a lot of us decide, "Nah, when that ain't around, I can't do that no more. So I'm gonna go ahead and get involved with what's happening here." Taking along with what he already had and trying to deal with what is being presented, and that those two are diametrically opposed. Okay. And we have to be clear on when those forces are being used. When that they're almost pretty simple, because if you have to force somebody, you have to coerce somebody, if you have to throw them in jail over something that you think they need to be doing, then in a lot of ways, it ain't coming from a true source of a people, because a true source of a people are not going to be like that. They're going to be able to, take what you got, and you're going to take what they got, and you share, and we just don't live in that type of world. We got a world where people are bent on, trying to tell you what to do, and explaining it to you in a way that uh, only benefits them. It doesn't benefit you, and you're supposed to be okay with that, and that's going to be all right, and eventually y'all going, no, that ain't none of that, because the system was designed never to do that. So how you expect, this is all going to, work out, and so those are the things that I'm trying to delve into. There are also things that are I'm sitting here trying to do two things at once, but the imagery, like right now when I look at this picture, I think about how much I'm going to have to try to refine these images, because I have them laid out pretty good now. They're pretty simple to see. Now, how do I sharpen that? Take this picture to another level. And then again, how much do I leave it the way it is? Because there's a balance between those two. There's one that I can spend time trying to make sure every little nick and cranny is right. And then there's also the time that I might lose in what the meaning of the painting might be. Is a painting to have it look exactly like that? No. The painting is to have you understand that this is some, the world that we're living in is basically been created by either whips or wages. And, I could take that same approach to any idea that I feel is necessary to bring about a result. Taking, I was doing some stuff, thinking about art, right? Or the word art, right? And art, it's not the material that you use to create art. It's actually the what you craft in your idea. And that's kind of maybe hard to explain, but there was a guy who was just reading I heard about, and he sold an idea that he created an invisible painting. and then it sold for like $15,000. I wanted to say $75,000, but I just couldn't believe that. But it might have been. I mean, but the fact that you could sell something that's invisible brought up the idea of, art is not what you use, it ain't the material that you use, or, or crafting is not, uh, the material that you create with. It's the idea, and, you know, but that could be delved into a lot more too. But the other part of what I was thinking about was the idea of being a child when you do your work, right? That a child is less, now how can I put this? A child knows that the work that it's done to produce a piece of craft, they put some effort into it. And that effort that they put into it may not be recognized by a lot of people because they're looking at it from a point of view, oh, it's this child's work. This is what this child did. But in essence, that child at that time creating that idea, that piece of work, put the most effort it possibly could into creating that idea. And if you even got a glimmer of that idea, like, oh, that's a man, or that's a little boy, or that's a core, that's a sun, that's the ground, then you got what that effort was meant for. You got the idea that was supposed to be placed in it. And then like the third, this is like the final point, was the idea of if the work is revolutionary, meaning that the idea liberates you, like it takes you out of something that you were in, and and that could even that does not have to be visible. I think that the real part of craft that is really expressing the idea, and is done, not effortlessly, but the effort is seen in what was done. That the fact that you're still breathing, that you're still alive, doing that, is within itself, revolutionary, and what kind of society do we live in that can allow that to happen and allow that to be created? Or is there very few people that can actually do that? Like, I like to know that no matter where there's a person on this planet, they have a spot where they can, come up with ideas, and they can do them, put all the effort they want into them, and they're able to breathe, without any distraction from that. That, I don't know if that's too much to ask, but that is enough, I think, for us to do, is to require a political and economic system that it can't happen in capitalism. Let's be clear. Capitalism will not allow anything but profit to be made off of people. It was never designed to do anything other than that. But the idea of these capitalists who've employed masses of people and decide their fate, whether they work, whether they don't work, what kind of house they buy, what kind of car they drive, all of that nonsense is at the root of the problem. We have grown as a group of masses of people around the world that who should be running this place, right? We have it backwards. We have the idea that somehow or another these profiteers are better at making decisions than the masses of the people. And the masses of people just don't know what to do. They don't know how to put a system like that together, and have it operate. But there has been cases, I don't have them off the top of my head, but there's been cases that have proven that the masses of the people know how to work and operate this system of this world a lot more ecological than a handful. Should that not make sense? I mean, how could you think that there are 5 people in the world that know what's best for 50 trillion people? Or let's just flip that. Could 50 trillion people decide what's best for 5? I think that works a whole lot better. It's just not the way we think, and it's not the way we're programmed in a lot of ways to think, even though we could think it. I mean, there's the whole idea of being, this revolutionary kind of thing is that the what is being, presented is in you. It's just you just don't remember. You just forgot, or you need something to click, and then the light goes on. The spark is ignited. That is probably the biggest drawback to the imagination of people is they don't have a surplus of it. There tends to all their imagination is rooted in whether their team wins or whether they get that job or where they live and where they're going out to eat. That imagination limits you to the constraints of the people that are going to be providing that to you. And so for me, trying to tear the roof off the sucker, the roof is on fire, is to, once that roof is burnt off, once we tear the roof off, we're going to be able to plot a different course, in life, and I know that it's not going to be easy. I know that there's going to be a lot of violence directed toward this idea and its accomplishments, but it's human to want to live, in a liberated zone, right? It's human not to want to kill somebody or not to rape, or murder or have to steal from somebody. It's human, and it's more than that. It's even more than that. It's like the protection of mother, which is, an even greater thought, how do we protect, the planet, the people of the planet who all had mothers, not just some, not just few. There was nobody born without a mother, and everybody is somebody's child. And when we all start realizing that no child, should be left behind. Yeah, remember that? No child left behind. Where is that nowadays? Because I still think that they did not fulfill that one neither. That was another lie. No child left behind. You can go down the list though. There's always, a reason not to do something. People come up with a whole lot of excuses here. They'll say, "Oh yeah, I'll be there. I'm gonna check you out," and then, "Oh, I forgot." Oh, something else came up. And even to the extent that they will make you think they're coming by, buying a ticket or purchase and never show up, just so that they could say they did what they said they was going to do. And so there's a lot of that. There's a lot of fakery, deep fakery, right? That goes on. And I try to put on canvas the things that help you to see that. Not only the fakery, but the high truth, right? Like I consider this painting to have a high truth, right? And if I can convince others that without having to say a word, just sitting there, letting them breathe it in, I feel like I've accomplished what I set out to do, And so that's what, that's how y'all focus should be, is on an idea, something that you put a lot of effort into, and something that sparks people's imagination, and that's really what's all you can do, to be honest. It may in some ways be successful, but I think that if it is successful, that it's going to change the environment that you're living in, or the environment that the rest of the world is living in, and that's kind of like when I look at what the high truth of creation, or crafting something, out of with your hands, and your feet could be but really you crafting with your mind, and then whatever part of your body that needs to, you know, have someone, breathe next to it, then that would be, whatever tool you choose, and but I think that it's pretty, for me, that's what that has been my, you know, um, realization, my self examination, through expression, and that's going to be somewhat where I'm working on, these next few years, is my own looking inside myself, and then deciding upon that, what the expression is going to be, and it's a little different approach than I maybe think a lot of people, because uh, I think I look at things from a point of view of, first I've examined them for myself, and then I've taken that examination and tried to express it. And I think I'm trying to, for me, I'm trying to get better at that, trying to make sure that's something that, continues, and it's seen throughout, my work. But I think, I've been doing this for now about 50 years. And, each year, it's it gets, I don't say it gets better, but I'm able to improve upon, the idea, the effort, and the word, the breath that's in the painting, Um, but yeah, people, this is about we've been ready to cut it short. We're gonna do it up. It's, this is africaonthemove.com. This is uh, the roof is on fire. You can find me at all the social media sites at Awakening Kinship. Uh, and I'm gonna try to get one in June. Be the next time, and you'll probably see me working on some newer paintings at that time. I don't think this one is still gonna be sitting there unless I ain't been doing nothing. But I don't think that's gonna happen. But yeah, so I'm just glad I got this in, before Malcolm X's birthday, May 19th, and want to make sure that we honor all our ancestral leaders, and make sure that they're in continuous are continuously making our decisions, and continuously moving in us in a direction forward, right? Not backwards. Forward ever, backwards never. Again, Namo Kofi Joe, rooted. I'm rooted. You see, I'm rooted. You see that? Rooted. I'm rooted. Okay. Y'all gotta recognize, you know, for the people, okay? With the people. I'm down by law. I'm down by law for the people. Okay. So yeah, this is your brother signing off. Namo Kofi Joe. The roof is on fire. We don't need no water. Let that motherfucker burn.